Friday practice at the Japanese Grand Prix was badly disrupted by 4 red flags in FP2, but there is loads we have learned at Suzuka. It was obviously Yuki Tsunoda's first day in the Red Bull, all eyes on him, but he's not just swapped cars with Liam Lawson, he's swapped positions. Lawson's now starring in the Racing Bulls, and Tsunoda's struggling, at least on paper, with the FP2 result in the Red Bull. John, why was Racing Bulls faster than the Red Bull here, on Friday at least?
Yeah, I think a couple of factors. We know it's a well-sorted car. They've cured the inconsistencies of last year, so the driver's got a confident platform underneath them. It was a gusty day out there today, freezing cold. Some of us got sunburn from it, even so. So I think the drivers had confidence on a day when others were perhaps struggling a little bit. That flattered them. Those 4 red flags made the session really hard to read. I think they just nailed the laps when perhaps others didn't. But you've also got to look at the gaps. You know, 3rd quickest for Hadjar is a stunning performance, but 1/10 of the second drops him down into 7th, which is still impressive, but it's kind of where they've been on kind of single lap pace. So I think you've got to put it all into context, but they've got a good baseline. The drivers are confident. I don't see any reason why they can't not necessarily be 3rd, but keep pushing at that front end of that midfield.
We'll come to Lawson specifically in a moment. Actually, on Hadjar and that Racing Bulls, I was trackside all day in FP1 and FP2, and it really stands out for just how controllable and benign it is and how much it invites the drivers to push. But let's sort of focus on Tsunoda and Red Bull a little bit more. It was a very encouraging start to the day. He was a 10th off Max Verstappen in FP1, and although Lawson didn't get much chance in Red Bull, that was obviously a lot more than Lawson showed in his 2 weekends alongside Verstappen. The final result was unrepresentative because of the FP2 shambles and the many interruptions. Tsunoda didn't do a qualifying simulation, but it was trickier for him. He didn't seem as happy after FP2. It didn't visibly show from trackside, but Verstappen also wasn't happy today, either was he. So, and Lawson offered quite an interesting contrast to that.
Yeah, I mean, last race in China, you know, Lawson kept talking about this narrow window that Red Bull operates in. It's really difficult. And today, I mean, I don't know if it's deliberate or not, but the quote was how good the window was at the Racing Bulls. And in contrast, Max, you know, quite not downbeat, but just feeling that he hasn't got the confidence, isn't comfortable in the car. There was also these weird comments from him about the car flexing, which I don't know if it's kind of a representation of, you know, this disconnection they've had between the front and rear axles in the past, or there's something physical going on with that car. But it's not in a happy place. But we know Red Bull have had hard Fridays, bounce back on Saturdays. This is Max Verstappen at a track like Suzuka, so he's going to be in the mix. The question is, how hard is he going to have to push it? And equally, is whether change of wind conditions going to shuffle things around tomorrow as well.
Well, in terms of the fight at the front, no one will be surprised to know that McLaren looked very quick on Friday. The car looks great on track. It had a big advantage in terms of the headline pace. But in terms of actually who's best of the rest, let's throw to our colleague Mark Hughes. This is one that we filmed a little bit earlier, as you might be able to tell from the fact that it's daylight outside.
On the first day at least, best of the rest behind McLaren is very clearly George Russell's Mercedes. It's every bit as fast as the McLarens in Sector 1. In fact, by the time he gets to the top of the S's on his fastest lap, he's marginally ahead of both McLarens. He then keeps good performance through the lap, not quite as good as the McLarens in the Sectors 2 and 3, but it's not that far away. And in contrast, the Ferrari isn't that far away in Sector 1 either, but it loses progressively more performance and is about 0.3 down in the last sector, and it's just not looking after its tyres as well. Maybe it's having to run a little bit high ride height, and that's perhaps losing it a little bit of rear downforce, who knows, but that's where we are. And in who's best of the rest, Red Bull about the same as Ferrari.
Well, beyond obviously all the teams at the front, the big story sort of further back was Jack Doohan's massive crash, an unforced error just by the driver, failing to deactivate DRS before turning into turn 1. Hugely costly. He obviously hadn't run in FP1, but John, how badly did Doohan not need this?
Yeah, far from ideal. I mean, he's already faced scrutiny, a lot of scrutiny and questions about his future that need to impress. Some of that's kind of been stirred up by some sections of the media. Some of it's obviously come from the team bringing Colapinto in and him being front and centre. But, you know, he needs good results. He's had some strong performances. Obviously, the crash in Melbourne didn't help. And today far from ideal. You know, he lost FP1 running because he wasn't in the car. So he's obviously playing catch up on a very difficult day. Binning it, you know, means he's got almost zero running. But again, it just adds that pressure on a little bit more, ramps things up even more. But this is Formula One, the pressure's always high, but he's now just got to elevate himself and rise above it. As he's done in the past, he has some strong race weekends already. I don't think there's any reason why, you know, this is the beginning of the end or any more questions, but he just needs to get on with it, put his head down like he's done in the past and deliver. I
don't want to make it sound like I'm making too many excuses for Doohan, but I think a mitigating factor is that he didn't do FP1, and that was a conscious decision by Alpine that I just think was flawed. They put Ryo Hirakawa in the car, one of their reserve drivers. No surprise why he was in the car here. And the reason it was Doohan that made way is that, as I understand it, it was meant to be Pierre Gasly, but because of the difficult start to the season they've had, Alpine wanted Gasly in the car to be able to benchmark, I think, a change they wanted to make after obviously what they've learned from the first two races, and they felt that was sort of better overall. But I just don't think Doohan makes that mistake in FP1. If it's a much easier run into turn one on your first push laps, you're taking it a lot easier, you're building up. He didn't have the time to do that. He still shouldn't have made the error. It was a poor error. He'll know that, but I think it is worth stressing that point. But it was far from the only stoppage in FP2. You had the Doohan crash, Fernando Alonso spinning into the gravel, which I think was because he put a wheel off track on entry and then was confused that something had happened on entry. And then two of the weirdest red flags you'll see in Formula One. Not one that we haven't seen before, though.
Yeah, not two of the weirdest, because I think we've already had a year of weird red flags.
True.
We had the power cut in Bahrain testing, we had the bus on the track or next to the track, and we had the glass being shattered in the gantry in testing. So I think testing may win the weird red flags, but grass fires, maybe one grass fire is a bit weird, but two's definitely a bit extreme. Likely caused by sparks. The grass is very dry here. But what's interesting is, the FI don't really have an explanation to why it's been so bad. But we understand why they've cut the grass tonight. They've tried to pull away as much dried grass as possible to minimise the problem. And I think the hose pipes will be out in the morning just to dampen it down. But probably not ideal for drivers as well at a track where there's very little runoff. You don't want to put a wheel onto some wet grass because it can exacerbate things a bit more.
Exactly. One final thing from Suzuka so far this week in terms of what we learned is what's going on more towards the back of the field with Haas. They obviously had a better weekend in China, but they were worried that they would have a big repeat of the Melbourne disaster performance-wise here. So they have fast-tracked an upgrade to the car. They've done it unconventionally. They basically started designing and then building the part before it even done CFD off wind tunnel work. It's on the car. It does seem to be working, but it wasn't a perfect day for that, was it?
No, they split the cars. They put the new floor on Ollie Behrman's car, Esteban on the old one to back it. After first practice, they seemed a bit lost. Ayao Komatsu talked about they'd cured one problem and found another. Didn't go into too much detail about what it was. So I think they was a bit worried about how things were going to look. But FP2, although it was interrupted, Ollie pushed a bit more, went a bit more to the limit. And actually, it unlocked the performance. They didn't have the weakness that they've suffered, especially in Melbourne, turn 9-10, in the high-speed compressions. So they're confident enough to switch Esteban to the floor from Saturday and see how the rest of the weekend rolls out. But I think they're still kind of understanding this car and where are the weaknesses, what's caused the weaknesses. Because I think until they're in a situation where, until it is cured, they won't actually know what the actual trigger for it all was, because teams are still got so in the dark about what's going on underneath these cars.